never imagined I'd be sitting across from my own daughter-in-law in a sterile conference room, watching her face crumble as the detective read the charges against her. Attempted poisoning, fraud, conspiracy to commit bodily harm. The woman who had called me mom for 7 years, who had bounced my granddaughter on her lap at countless Sunday dinners, had been slowly trying to kill me with foxglove leaves hidden in my favorite tomato basil soup. But here's the thing about underestimating a woman who spent 30 years building a business from the ground up. We don't just survive, we learn, and then we act with precision that would make a surgeon jealous. Ashley thought she was playing chess with someone who didn't know the rules. She had no idea she was sitting across from someone who had been quietly documenting every move, every lie, every calculated smile for months. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Thompson, though everyone calls me Maggie, and this is the story of how my son's wife tried to poison me to steal my family's restaurant empire, and how I served her a dish of consequences she'll never forget. 3 months earlier, I was still the unsuspecting matriarch of Thompson's Table, a 3-generation family restaurant that had anchored downtown Riverside, Ohio since my father-in-law Harold opened its doors in 1952. The restaurant sat on prime real estate overlooking the Ohio River, its wraparound windows offering diners a view that changed with the seasons. Spring brought cherry blossoms from the riverbank park, summer painted the water gold at sunset, autumn set the surrounding hills ablaze with color, and winter created a crystalline wonderland that made our dining room feel like something from a snow globe. I had married into the Thompson family 35 years ago, a young woman with a chemistry degree I'd never gotten to use, swept off my feet by Robert Thompson, whose passion for hospitality matched my own love of bringing people together over exceptional food. When Robert's father Harold passed in 1994, we inherited not just a restaurant, but a legacy built on the simple principle that food prepared with love and served with genuine warmth could be a cornerstone of community life. Robert and I had modernized carefully over the years, updating the kitchen to professional standards, expanding the wine list to include selections from Ohio's emerging vineyards, and developing catering services that had become the gold standard for weddings and corporate events throughout the region. We'd weathered economic downturns, the rise of chain restaurants, and the challenge of maintaining quality while growing revenue. When Robert passed suddenly from a heart attack 3 years ago, I inherited his 65% ownership stake, making me the majority owner of a business now valued at nearly $3 million annually. Our son David had grown up in the restaurant, washing dishes as a teenager, learning every aspect of the operation before going to college for accounting. He'd always been more comfortable with numbers than with the front-of-house people skills that came naturally to his father and me, but his financial acumen had helped us expand profitably while maintaining the personal touch that set us apart from corporate dining chains. When he married Ashley 7 years ago, I had welcomed her not just as a daughter-in-law but as a potential heir to the family legacy. Ashley had seemed perfect for David, and for our family. She was beautiful, in an understated way, with shoulder-length auburn hair and green eyes that sparkled when she laughed. More importantly, she appeared to genuinely appreciate the history and values that Thompson's Table represented. She'd worked in pharmaceutical sales before their marriage, a job that required the kind of people skills and attention to detail that could translate well to restaurant management. When Robert decided to give Ashley a 10% ownership stake as a wedding gift, it had seemed like a natural way to welcome her fully into the family business. Those early years had been wonderful. Ashley would bring 5-year-old Emma to the restaurant after school, letting her help fold napkins and arrange flowers on tables while I finished administrative work in my office. Sunday family dinners had become sacred traditions, with 3 generations gathering in our private dining room to share both meals and business updates. Ashley contributed thoughtful suggestions for menu updates and marketing strategies, and her pharmaceutical background proved useful when we needed to manage workers' compensation claims and ensure proper handling of kitchen safety protocols. The changes began subtly after Robert's death. Ashley started questioning decisions I'd made for decades, suggesting that I was being too conservative in my approach to expansion. She researched franchise opportunities and presented detailed proposals for opening Thompson's Table locations in Columbus and Cincinnati. When I explained that our strength lay in being a unique, community-focused establishment rather than a chain, she'd nod and smile. But I could see the frustration in her eyes. 6 months ago, Ashley had lost her pharmaceutical sales position when Medicore downsized their regional operations. The job loss seemed to intensify her focus on the restaurant business. She began arriving at Thompson's table earlier and staying later, inserting herself into operational decisions that had previously been handled by our experienced management team. She questioned vendor relationships I'd cultivated over decades, suggested cost-cutting measures that would compromise quality, and pushed repeatedly for the kind of rapid expansion that could destroy everything Robert and I had built. The first incident happened on a Sunday in early September. Our family dinners always featured my signature tomato basil soup, a recipe I'd perfected over 20 years of serving it as a weekly special. The soup was comfort food at its finest. San Marzano tomatoes slowly simmered with fresh basil, a touch of cream, and a secret blend of herbs that gave it a complexity that kept customers coming back week after week. That particular Sunday, I noticed the soup tasted slightly different, with an earthy, bitter undertone that didn't belong. When I mentioned it to Linda Parker, our longtime housekeeper who helped serve family meals, she looked puzzled. She'd watched me prepare the soup earlier that day, and nothing had seemed unusual. Ashley, who was sitting across from me at our family table, immediately suggested that perhaps my taste buds were changing with age, a comment that stung more than I wanted to admit. About an hour after dinner, I began experiencing heart palpitations and a strange weakness that sent David into full panic mode. He insisted on driving me to Riverside General Hospital, where emergency room tests showed irregular heart rhythms that couldn't be immediately explained. Dr. Helen Rodriguez, who had been our family physician for 15 years, ran comprehensive tests but found no obvious cause for the episode. She increased my blood thinner medication as a precaution and scheduled follow-up appointments to monitor my condition. The second incident occurred 3 weeks later, again during Sunday dinner, again after consuming my tomato basil soup. This time, the symptoms were more severe: dizziness, nausea, and chest tightness that left me genuinely frightened. Ashley was the first to suggest that perhaps the stress of running the restaurant alone was taking a toll on my health. She volunteered to take on more management responsibilities to help lighten my load during what she called my quote, health crisis. Dr. Rodriguez conducted even more extensive testing after the second episode, including a comprehensive cardiac workup and blood panels that checked for everything from vitamin deficiencies to autoimmune disorders. Everything came back normal, which only deepened the mystery of my symptoms. She referred me to a cardiologist in Columbus for additional testing, but the episode seemed isolated to Sunday evenings, and by Monday morning I always felt completely normal. It was Ashley who suggested that perhaps I should consider stepping back from the day-to-day management of Thompson's table. During a family meeting she'd requested in late October, she presented a thoughtful analysis of how my health episodes could be affecting the business. She'd researched statistics about stress-related health problems in business owners over 55, compiled information about succession planning in family restaurants, and created a proposal for gradually transitioning management responsibilities to her and David. The proposal was comprehensive and professionally presented. Ashley suggested that I retain my ownership stake but move into an advisory role, focusing on menu development and community relations, while she and David handled operations, staffing, and financial management. She'd even researched comparable businesses to determine appropriate compensation for an advisory position versus active management. On paper, her suggestions made sense. In reality, they would effectively remove me from meaningful control of the business I'd spent 30 years building. David seemed torn between concern for my health and loyalty to my vision for the restaurant. He'd grown up watching his father and me build Thompson's Table into a regional institution, and he understood that our success came from personal attention to details that corporate management couldn't replicate. But Ashley's presentation was persuasive, especially when she emphasized how my health episodes always seemed to occur when I was most stressed about business decisions. The third incident was the charm, as they say, though not in the way Ashley intended. It happened on a gray November Sunday when early snow was beginning to dust the riverbank outside our dining room windows. I'd prepared the tomato basil soup with extra care that day, using the last of the fresh basil from our restaurant garden before winter's full arrival. The taste was unmistakably wrong again, that same bitter, earthy undertone that didn't belong in a recipe I could prepare in my sleep. This time, however, I was ready. 3 months of mysterious health episodes had awakened the analytical mind that my chemistry degree had trained decades earlier, but that marriage and motherhood had redirected toward other pursuits. Instead of finishing the soup, I quietly excused myself to the kitchen, claiming I needed to check on dessert preparation. I transferred the remaining soup from my bowl into a small container, labeled it discreetly, and stored it in the walk-in freezer behind some prep containers where it wouldn't be discovered accidentally. When the familiar symptoms began an hour later, heart palpitations, weakness, and dizziness, I didn't panic this time. Instead, I observed them with clinical detachment, noting the timing, severity, and progression of each symptom. I allowed David to drive me to the hospital as usual, but this time I brought the soup sample with me, sealed in a small cooler bag that I claimed contained medication Dr. Rodriguez had asked me to keep refrigerated. Dr. Rodriguez was intrigued when I privately showed her the soup sample and explained my suspicions. As both my physician and my friend, she'd been increasingly concerned about the pattern of my symptoms, their severity, their timing, and their resistance to conventional treatment. She agreed to send the soup sample to a toxicology lab for analysis, though she cautioned that testing could take several days and might not reveal anything conclusive. The results arrived the following Friday morning in a phone call that changed everything. Dr. Rodriguez's voice was tense when she asked me to come to her office immediately for a private consultation. When I arrived, she closed her office door and pulled up the lab results on her computer screen. "Maggie," she said carefully, "your soup sample tested positive for digitalis, specifically cardiac glycosides consistent with foxglove plant material. The concentration was significant enough to cause the symptoms you've been experiencing, especially given your blood thinner medication, which would amplify the effects." I stared at the screen, my analytical mind processing the implications while my emotional self struggled to accept them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Someone had been deliberately putting digitalis in my food. Not enough to kill me outright, but enough to cause concerning symptoms that would suggest serious health problems. Someone with knowledge of my heart medication and its interactions. Someone with access to my kitchen during family dinners. Someone who would benefit from convincing my family that I was too ill to continue running Thompson's table. Dr. Rodriguez continued explaining that digitalis, derived from foxglove plants, was once used medicinally for heart conditions, but was extremely dangerous, especially for someone taking blood thinners. The bitter taste I'd noticed was characteristic of the plant material. The timing of my symptoms, always within an hour of consuming the soup, was consistent with digitalis poisoning. Most critically, the dosing appeared calculated to cause alarming symptoms without being immediately fatal, suggesting someone with pharmaceutical knowledge was involved. As I sat in Dr. Rodriguez's office, absorbing the reality that someone in my own family had been slowly poisoning me, I felt something shift inside me. The confusion and fear of the past 3 months crystallized into cold, clear anger. Not the hot, explosive rage that leads to confrontation and mistakes, but the ice-cold fury of a woman who has been systematically betrayed by someone she trusted completely. I thought about Ashley's pharmaceutical background, her knowledge of drug interactions, her access to my kitchen during Sunday dinners. I remembered her immediate suggestions that my symptoms were stress-related, her eagerness to take on management responsibilities, her frustration with my conservative approach to business expansion. I recalled how she'd been the first to taste the soup each Sunday, claiming to help me check the seasoning, and how she'd always encouraged me to eat heartily while taking only small portions herself. Most damning of all, I remembered Robert's decision to give Ashley 10% ownership in the business. At the time, it had seemed like a generous wedding gift and a way to ensure family unity. Now I realized it had created a potential motive for someone willing to commit attempted murder to gain control of a multi-million-dollar business. Dr. Rodriguez was watching my face carefully as these realizations unfolded. As both my physician and friend, she could see that I was processing more than just medical information. "Maggie," she said gently, "you need to report this to the police. This isn't just a medical issue anymore. It's attempted poisoning. Someone has been deliberately endangering your life." I nodded slowly, but my mind was already working beyond the immediate crisis toward longer-term strategy. Yes, I would report this to the police, but I would also document everything else I could discover about Ashley's motivations and methods. If she was desperate enough to attempt murder for control of Thompson's table, there were probably other secrets waiting to be uncovered. Helen, I said finally, I need you to document everything about my symptoms and treatment over the past 3 months. I also need you to keep this lab result completely confidential until I can gather more evidence. Can you do that for me? She nodded, understanding that I was planning something more comprehensive than simply filing a police report. Just promise me you'll be careful, Maggie. If Ashley is desperate enough to poison you, she might be dangerous in other ways too. I promised to be cautious, but as I left Dr. Rodriguez's office that Friday afternoon, I was already planning my next moves. Ashley had made 2 critical mistakes in her attempt to eliminate me from Thompson's table. First, she'd underestimated my intelligence and analytical abilities, assuming that a restaurant owner couldn't uncover sophisticated poisoning. Second, she'd failed to realize that someone who had spent 30 years building a business from the ground up had developed skills in investigation, documentation, and strategic planning that extended far beyond menu development and customer service. Over the weekend, I began what would become the most important research project of my life. I started with Ashley's background, using public records and social media to trace her activities over the past several months. What I discovered was a pattern of financial stress and increasingly desperate behavior that explained everything about her recent focus on gaining control of the restaurant. Ashley had been gambling heavily online, initially using small amounts from her pharmaceutical sales commissions, but escalating rapidly after her job loss. Credit card records that I could access through our shared business accounts showed charges to gambling websites, cash advances, and payments to what appeared to be loan services. The amounts were staggering, over $40,000 in debt accumulated in just 6 months. More disturbing was evidence that Ashley had been forging prescriptions using contacts from her pharmaceutical sales days. Security footage from a pharmacy near our restaurant showed her picking up pain medications that were supposedly for kitchen staff injuries, but employee health records showed no corresponding claims or incidents. She'd been selling prescription drugs to generate cash for her gambling debts. By Sunday morning, I had assembled a comprehensive picture of Ashley's motivations and methods. The attempted poisoning wasn't just about gaining control of Thompson's table. It was about desperately trying to access capital to cover gambling debts that were spiraling out of control. My death or incapacitation would trigger insurance policies and ownership transfers that could provide Ashley with enough money to pay off her creditors and fund the restaurant expansion she believed would solve her financial problems permanently. I also realized that Sunday dinner would provide the perfect opportunity to gather the final evidence I needed. Ashley would undoubtedly attempt to poison my soup again, assuming that her previous attempts had been successful in making me appear increasingly frail and confused. This time, however, I would be ready not just to document the attempt, but to record it in a way that would provide unshakable legal evidence. I spent Sunday morning preparing for what I knew would be the most important family dinner in Thompson's table history. I set up my phone to record our meal, positioning it discreetly among the flowers in our centerpiece, where it would capture Ashley's actions without being obvious. I prepared the tomato basil soup exactly as always, but this time I watched every moment of its preparation and never left it unattended. When Ashley arrived with David and Emma for our weekly family dinner, her behavior was subtly different from previous weeks. She seemed more confident, more assertive in discussing restaurant business. She'd prepared another presentation about expansion opportunities, complete with financial projections and market analysis. She was planning to use my expected health episode as leverage to convince David that immediate management changes were necessary. What Ashley didn't know was that I'd already contacted James Mitchell, our family attorney, who would be reviewing security footage from the restaurant's kitchen cameras. She didn't know that Dr. Rodriguez had preserved samples of my blood from previous episodes that could now be tested for digitalis. She didn't know that I discovered her gambling debts and prescription drug sales. Most importantly, Ashley didn't know that the soup she was about to poison was being recorded in high definition, and that the woman she'd been trying to eliminate was about to become the architect of her own destruction. As we sat around the family table that gray November Sunday, 3 generations of Thompsons sharing what would be our last meal together as a family, I watched Ashley carefully taste my soup before encouraging me to eat heartily. I saw her slip something from her purse into my bowl when she thought no one was looking. I observed her checking her watch, timing when my symptoms should begin. And I smiled, knowing that she was about to discover what happens when you try to poison a woman who's spent 30 years building an empire, and who has no intention of giving it up without a fight. That evening, after Ashley's careful poisoning attempt had been captured on video, I sat in my home office reviewing decades of family photographs that lined the oak shelves Robert had built for me years ago. There I was at David's high school graduation, beaming with pride as our son accepted academic honors that would earn him a full scholarship to Ohio State. There was Ashley's bridal shower, where I had welcomed her into our family with genuine warmth, presenting her with my grandmother's pearl earrings as a symbol of acceptance and continuity. Wedding photos showed all of us laughing together at the reception held in Thompson's table private dining room, Ashley cutting cake with the antique silver knife that had served 3 generations of Thompson celebrations. Each photograph now felt like evidence of my own naivete, documentation of trust given freely to someone who had been calculating how to destroy me from the very beginning. The woman who had called me mom for 7 years, who had bounced my granddaughter Emma on her lap while teaching her to fold napkins for Sunday dinners, had been systematically planning my elimination with the cold precision of a pharmaceutical sales presentation. I had been Margaret Thompson long before I became the matriarch of a restaurant empire. Born Margaret Sullivan in nearby Portsmouth, I was the daughter of a high school chemistry teacher and a nurse, raised to value education, hard work, and the kind of intellectual curiosity that led me to pursue a bachelor's degree in chemistry at the University of Cincinnati. My plan had been to continue toward a master's degree in pharmaceutical chemistry, perhaps eventually working in drug development or medical research. Those ambitions shifted when I met Robert Thompson during my senior year, a charming business major whose passion for hospitality and family legacy proved more compelling than laboratory research. Marrying into the Thompson family meant embracing a different kind of chemistry, the delicate balance of flavors and personalities that made a restaurant more than just a place to eat. Harold Thompson, Robert's father, had built Thompson's Table during the post-war economic boom, when Riverside was expanding from a sleepy river town into a regional hub for manufacturing and commerce. The restaurant occupied a prime location on Main Street, its wide windows overlooking the Ohio River and the tree-lined park that separated downtown from the water. Harold had always treated me as a daughter rather than just a daughter-in-law, recognizing that my analytical mind and attention to detail complemented Robert's natural charisma and business instincts. When menu development required understanding the science behind flavor combinations, I contributed knowledge about how different compounds interacted to create complex tastes. When we upgraded kitchen equipment, I researched the chemistry of food safety and developed protocols that exceeded health department requirements. When financial planning required analyzing cost structures and profit margins, my scientific training helped me identify inefficiencies that emotional decision-making might have overlooked. After Harold passed and Robert inherited the restaurant, we had transformed Thompson's Table from a solid local establishment into a regional destination. We expanded the wine list to include selections from Ohio's emerging vineyards, developed catering services that became the preferred choice for upscale events throughout the Tri-County area, and created seasonal menus that showcased local ingredients while maintaining the comfort food classics that had built our reputation. My tomato basil soup had become legendary among regular customers, who would request the recipe at least once a week and accept my polite refusal with good humor. The chemistry degree that I had never formally used in a laboratory setting had proven invaluable in countless ways throughout my 35 years as a restaurant owner. Understanding protein structures helped me develop marinades that tenderized meat more effectively than traditional methods. Knowledge of pH levels and chemical reactions guided my approach to bread baking, sauce development, and preservation techniques. Most importantly, my scientific training had taught me to observe carefully, document thoroughly, and draw conclusions based on evidence rather than assumptions. Those skills had become crucial when Ashley's poisoning attempts began, though I hadn't immediately recognized what was happening. The first episode in September had been genuinely frightening, the heart palpitations and weakness unlike anything I had experienced before. Dr. Rodriguez's comprehensive testing had found no obvious medical explanation, leading both of us to assume that stress from running the business alone might be affecting my health in unexpected ways. Ashley's immediate suggestion that I was overworking myself had seemed caring rather than calculated. The second episode in October had been more severe, the symptoms lasting longer and requiring more extensive medical evaluation. By then, Ashley had begun positioning herself as the concerned daughter-in-law, worried about my declining health and its potential impact on the family business. She researched stress-related health problems in older adults, compiled statistics about heart disease in women over 55, and presented her findings with the same professional competence she had once used to sell pharmaceutical products to skeptical physicians. During those months, I had genuinely wondered whether the stress of managing Thompson's Table without Robert was more than I could handle long-term. The restaurant industry was notoriously demanding, requiring attention to countless details from food quality and staff management to customer relations and financial oversight. Ashley's suggestions about transitioning to an advisory role while she and David handled daily operations had appealed to my practical nature, even as my instincts warned against relinquishing control too quickly. It was only after the third poisoning attempt, when I had finally gathered the evidence that confirmed my growing suspicions, that I could see the full scope of Ashley's manipulation. Every conversation about my health, every suggestion about reducing my responsibilities, every expression of concern about my ability to continue managing the business had been carefully calculated to achieve a specific outcome. Ashley hadn't just been trying to poison my body, she had been systematically poisoning my confidence in my own capabilities. The discovery of Ashley's gambling addiction had explained everything about her increasingly desperate behavior over the past 6 months. Online gambling had become an epidemic problem, particularly among people with access to easy credit and the kind of pharmaceutical knowledge that Ashley possessed. The progression was predictable. Small bets funded by disposable income, early wins that encouraged larger wagers, inevitable losses that led to chasing previous losses with even bigger bets, and finally the spiral into debt that required increasingly desperate measures to obtain cash. Ashley's pharmaceutical sales background had provided her with the knowledge needed to forge prescriptions and the professional contacts necessary to obtain controlled substances. Pain medications were always in demand on the illegal market, and Ashley's legitimate medical connections had given her access to prescription pads and drug samples that could be resold for substantial profits. The forged prescriptions, supposedly for Thompson's Table kitchen staff, had been generating thousands of dollars monthly, money that went directly toward gambling debts and additional wagers that only deepened her financial crisis. The attempted poisoning represented Ashley's most desperate gamble yet. My death or permanent incapacitation would trigger several insurance policies that Robert had maintained to protect the business, providing Ashley with immediate access to substantial cash settlements. More importantly, my absence would remove the primary obstacle to her plans for rapid restaurant expansion. Ashley had already researched franchise opportunities, identified potential investors, and developed business plans for opening Thompson's Table locations in Columbus, Cincinnati, and other Ohio cities. What Ashley failed to understand was that Thompson's Table's success was built on precisely the kind of personal attention and community connection that corporate expansion would destroy. Our regular customers didn't come just for the food, though our menu was exceptional. They came for the sense of belonging that we had cultivated over 3 generations. The feeling that Thompson's Table was their place where special occasions were celebrated, business deals were negotiated, and family traditions were maintained. Our catering business thrived because clients trusted us to handle their most important events with the same attention to detail we brought to every dinner service. Our staff loyalty was legendary in an industry known for high turnover because we treated employees as extended family members rather than replaceable workers. Our reputation for quality and integrity had been built over decades through countless small decisions that prioritized long-term relationships over short-term profits. Ashley's franchise vision would have required standardizing recipes to ensure consistency across multiple locations, eliminating the seasonal variations and local ingredients that made our menu distinctive. It would have demanded corporate pricing structures that would price out many of our longtime customers while attracting diners who valued convenience over quality. Most critically, it would have destroyed the personal relationships with suppliers, staff, and customers that formed the foundation of everything we had built. As I sat in my office that Sunday evening, reviewing the video evidence of Ashley's latest poisoning attempt, I realized that her betrayal extended far beyond attempted murder. She was planning to destroy the legacy that Harold had created, that Robert had expanded, and that I had spent 30 years perfecting. The woman I had welcomed as a daughter was prepared to eliminate me not just physically but professionally, erasing everything I had contributed to Thompson's table, while claiming credit for the expansion plans that would ultimately destroy its soul. The weight of this realization settled over me like a physical presence, heavy and cold and utterly clarifying. Ashley had made a fundamental miscalculation in assuming that I was simply an aging restaurant owner who could be manipulated through false medical emergencies and professional intimidation. She had failed to recognize that my chemistry background, combined with 3 decades of business experience, had created someone far more formidable than she had anticipated. Monday morning brought the first phase of my response strategy. I arrived at Thompson's table before dawn, as had been my habit for years, to review weekend receipts and prepare for the weekly staff meeting. But this Monday was different. This Monday, I was no longer a victim of Ashley's schemes, but the architect of her downfall. I began by securing the video evidence of Sunday's poisoning attempt, transferring the files to multiple locations, and creating encrypted backups that would be accessible to law enforcement when the time came. The footage was damning, showing Ashley clearly adding something to my soup bowl while glancing around to ensure she wasn't being observed. The timing corresponded exactly with my scheduled symptoms, providing irrefutable proof of deliberate poisoning. Next, I contacted James Mitchell, our family attorney, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss what I described as sensitive family business matters. James had handled legal affairs for Thompson's table since Robert's father's time, and his discretion was absolute. More importantly, his experience with family business disputes had given him expertise in documenting evidence and building cases that would withstand legal scrutiny. I also reached out to Carol Stevens, my sister and closest confidant, asking her to meet me for lunch at a restaurant far from Thompson's table where we could speak privately. Carol was a retired bank executive whose financial expertise had often complemented my business decisions, and her perspective would be crucial for understanding the full scope of Ashley's deception. Most importantly, Carol knew me well enough to provide the emotional support I would need, while maintaining the strategic focus required to handle this crisis effectively. The staff meeting that Monday morning proceeded normally, with routine discussions about weekend service, upcoming reservations, and seasonal menu planning. Our kitchen manager Tom Bradley reported on supplier deliveries and discussed preparations for the week's specials. Our head server Linda Parker reviewed staffing schedules and noted several regular customers who had made special requests for upcoming celebrations. Everything appeared exactly as it had for years, the smooth operation of a well-managed restaurant staffed by experienced professionals who took pride in their work. What none of them knew was that their owner had spent the previous evening documenting attempted murder and was now planning the most complex strategic response of her career. I maintained my usual demeanor throughout the meeting, contributing to discussions about wine pairings and reviewing financial reports with the same attention to detail I had always demonstrated. The only difference was the small notebook where I occasionally jotted observations about staff interactions and operational procedures that might become relevant if Ashley's schemes required more comprehensive documentation. After the meeting concluded and the staff dispersed to begin lunch preparation, I retreated to my office to review the financial documents I had printed overnight. Ashley's gambling debts were even more extensive than my initial research had revealed, with credit card balances approaching $50,000 and what appeared to be private loans from sources that charged interest rates suggesting illegal lending operations. The pressure she was facing from creditors explained the timeline of her poisoning attempts, which had accelerated as her financial situation became more desperate. More disturbing was evidence that Ashley had been systematically stealing from Thompson's table over the past several months. Small amounts initially, cash skimmed from daily receipts and petty cash shortages that could be attributed to accounting errors. But the theft had escalated recently, with larger amounts disappearing from our catering deposits and what appeared to be fraudulent vendor payments to companies that didn't exist. Ashley's access to our financial systems through her 10% ownership stake had enabled theft that totaled nearly $15,000 over 6 months. The pattern was clear and damning. Ashley's gambling addiction had created debts that her legitimate income couldn't service. Theft from the restaurant had provided temporary relief, but wasn't sustainable long-term without detection. The forged prescriptions had generated more substantial cash but carried enormous legal risks if discovered. Poisoning me represented her final desperate attempt to gain control of assets that could solve her financial crisis permanently while eliminating the person most likely to discover her other crimes. My meeting with James Mitchell that afternoon took place in his downtown office, a restored 19th century building that reflected the blend of tradition and modernity that characterized successful Riverside businesses. James had represented our family through Robert's death, the subsequent business transitions, and various real estate transactions over the years. His understanding of both our personal relationships and business structure would be essential for navigating the legal complexities ahead. James listened carefully as I outlined the poisoning attempts, Ashley's gambling debts, the evidence of theft from Thompson's table, and the forged prescriptions that had funded her addiction. His expression grew increasingly grave as the scope of Ashley's crimes became clear. When I finished presenting my documentation, including the video evidence of Sunday's poisoning, he sat back in his leather chair and shook his head slowly. The legal implications were staggering. Attempted poisoning was a felony that could result in decades of prison time, particularly given the premeditation evident in Ashley's methods and the vulnerable victim status created by my age and medical conditions. The prescription fraud involved federal charges that carried mandatory minimum sentences. The theft from Thompson's table constituted embezzlement, while the forged vendor payments represented additional fraud charges. Combined, Ashley was facing potential criminal liability that could result in life imprisonment. From a business perspective, Ashley's crimes created immediate concerns about Thompson's table's reputation and financial stability. If her arrest became public, before we could control the narrative, the restaurant could suffer irreparable damage from association with criminal activity. Our catering clients, many of whom were prominent local businesses and social organizations, might cancel contracts to avoid negative publicity. Regular customers might question whether their food had been safe, whether our financial management was trustworthy, whether Thompson's table represented the values they wanted to support. James recommended immediate action on several fronts. First, we needed to secure all financial records and computer systems to prevent Ashley from destroying evidence or stealing additional funds. Second, we should contact law enforcement to report the poisoning attempts and provide the evidence I had gathered. Third, we needed to develop a communication strategy that would protect Thompson's table's reputation while ensuring that Ashley faced appropriate legal consequences for her crimes. Most importantly, James emphasized that everything I had discovered needed to be documented formally and preserved in ways that would meet legal standards for criminal prosecution. The video evidence was compelling, but it needed to be authenticated and secured according to chain of custody requirements. The financial records showing theft and gambling debts required forensic accounting to establish clear connections between Ashley's illegal activities and her access to restaurant resources. As I left James Mitchell's office that Monday afternoon, I felt the weight of responsibility that comes with holding someone's future in your hands. Ashley had chosen to commit multiple felonies that endangered my life and threatened everything my family had built over 3 generations. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and the legal consequences would be severe. But I also recognized that my response would define not just Ashley's fate, but Thompson's table's future and my family's ability to heal from this betrayal. That evening, I met Carol for dinner at a quiet restaurant in Portsmouth, far enough from Riverside to ensure privacy for the conversation we needed to have. Carol had been my closest confidant since childhood, the sister who had supported my decision to marry Robert despite her initial concerns about giving up my career ambitions, who had celebrated every success and provided comfort during every setback over the past 35 years. Carol listened with growing horror as I recounted Ashley's crimes and showed her copies of the evidence I had assembled. As a retired banking executive, she immediately understood the financial implications of Ashley's gambling debts and theft patterns. Her experience with fraud investigations had taught her to recognize the escalation patterns that led desperate people to commit increasingly serious crimes. What struck Carol most forcefully was the systematic nature of Ashley's deception. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a single bad decision made under pressure. Ashley had spent months planning and executing a complex scheme that required careful timing, detailed knowledge of my medical conditions, and calculated manipulation of family relationships. The woman who had seemed like a devoted daughter-in-law and caring mother had been living a double life that endangered everyone who trusted her. Carol's banker instincts also identified implications I hadn't fully considered. Ashley's gambling addiction and associated debts suggested connections to illegal lending operations that might not disappear simply because she was arrested. If Ashley owed money to dangerous people, my family could face ongoing threats even after legal proceedings concluded. The forged prescriptions indicated involvement in drug trafficking networks that operated outside normal law enforcement reach. Thompson's Table might need enhanced security measures to protect staff and customers from criminal associates seeking to pressure Ashley or retaliate against our family. Most importantly, Carol helped me process the emotional devastation of discovering that someone I had loved and trusted as a daughter had been planning my murder with pharmaceutical precision. The betrayal went beyond criminal activity to fundamental questions about my judgment, my ability to read people accurately, and my capacity to protect the business and family I cherished. Ashley's deception had been so complete that I questioned every interaction we had shared over 7 years, wondering what had been genuine and what had been calculated manipulation. Carol reminded me that narcissistic criminals were skilled at presenting false personalities that concealed their true intentions. Ashley's pharmaceutical sales background had required exactly the kind of people skills and emotional manipulation that enabled successful long-term deception. Her ability to research medical conditions and present professional analysis had lent credibility to her suggestions about my health problems. Most criminals who preyed on family members were experts at exploiting trust and affection to achieve their goals. As we finished dinner and prepared to return to our respective homes, Carol offered a perspective that would guide my decision-making in the days ahead. Ashley had made choices that endangered my life and threatened everything our family had built, but my response would determine whether Thompson's Table emerged stronger or was permanently damaged by association with her crimes. The restaurant's 3-generation legacy deserved protection, and our employees and customers deserved leadership that prioritized their interests over personal revenge. The strategic approach Carol recommended focused on swift, decisive action that would remove Ashley from our lives while minimizing damage to Thompson's Table's reputation and operations. We needed to coordinate with law enforcement to ensure Ashley's arrest and prosecution, while controlling the public narrative to emphasize that her crimes were individual choices that didn't reflect the restaurant's values or management. We needed to implement enhanced financial controls and security measures that would prevent future theft, while reassuring customers and employees that their safety was paramount. Most critically, Carol emphasized that my response needed to demonstrate the leadership qualities that had built Thompson's Table's success over decades. This crisis was a test of my ability to protect what mattered most while handling adversity with the grace and integrity that defined our family's reputation. Ashley's crimes were her responsibility, but Thompson's Table's future depended on my choices over the next several days. Tuesday morning brought the second phase of my strategic response. I arrived at the restaurant early, as always, but this time I was accompanied by Sarah Chen, a forensic accountant whom James Mitchell had recommended for examining our financial records. Sarah's expertise in fraud investigation would be essential for documenting the full scope of Ashley's theft and establishing the timeline of her criminal activity. Sarah spent the morning reviewing our accounting systems, identifying discrepancies that corresponded to Ashley's access periods, and tracing the movement of funds from legitimate business accounts to what appeared to be Ashley's personal use. Her analysis confirmed my suspicions about the extent of Ashley's theft while revealing additional irregularities that suggested even more systematic manipulation of our financial records. The pattern Sarah discovered was sophisticated and deliberate. Ashley had been creating false vendor entries for companies that existed only on paper, generating payments that were deposited into accounts she controlled. She had been skimming cash from catering deposits by reducing the recorded amounts, while pocketing the difference. Most cleverly, she had been manipulating our employee tip reporting to create discrepancies that could absorb small-scale theft without triggering obvious red flags in our accounting software. Combined with the prescription fraud and gambling debts, Ashley's financial crimes created a comprehensive picture of someone whose desperation had overwhelmed any remaining moral constraints. The attempted poisoning was simply the culmination of months of criminal activity that had grown progressively more serious as her debts increased and her options diminished. While Sarah continued her forensic analysis, I contacted Detective Maria Gonzalez at the Riverside Police Department to report the poisoning attempts and request an immediate investigation. Detective Gonzalez specialized in domestic violence and family crimes, with particular expertise in cases involving attempted murder between relatives. Her understanding of family dynamics and evidence requirements would be crucial for building a prosecution case that would withstand legal challenges. Detective Gonzalez arrived at Thompson's table that afternoon to review the evidence I had assembled and discuss the criminal charges that Ashley would face. The video footage of Sunday's poisoning attempt was particularly compelling, showing clear intent and premeditation that would support serious felony charges. The medical evidence Dr. Rodriguez had preserved from my previous episodes would establish a pattern of deliberate poisoning over several months. Most importantly, Detective Gonzalez confirmed that the evidence I had gathered met legal standards for criminal prosecution and that Ashley's arrest could be arranged within days once final documentation was complete. The charges would include attempted murder, prescription fraud, embezzlement, and additional counts related to her theft and manipulation of business records. The combination of charges virtually guaranteed significant prison time even if Ashley attempted to negotiate plea bargains. As Tuesday evening approached, I realized that the next 24 hours would determine not just Ashley's fate, but Thompson's table's future and my family's ability to survive this crisis. The evidence against Ashley was overwhelming, and law enforcement was prepared to act. But I also recognized that Ashley's arrest would create new challenges that required careful planning and flawless execution. David would be devastated to learn that his wife had been trying to murder his mother while stealing from the family business. Emma, at only 5 years old, would need protection from the trauma of seeing her mother arrested and potentially imprisoned for decades. Our restaurant staff would require reassurance that their jobs were secure, and that Thompson's Table would continue operating normally despite the criminal activity that had been occurring within our family. Most critically, I needed to ensure that Ashley's arrest didn't destroy the relationships and reputation that formed the foundation of Thompson's Table's success. Our customers trusted us not just for excellent food and service, but for the integrity and values that 3 generations of Thompsons had demonstrated. Ashley's crimes were her choice and her responsibility, but preserving Thompson's Table's legacy was mine. Wednesday morning would bring the final confrontation, the moment when Ashley's carefully constructed deception would crumble, and the consequences of her choices would become unavoidable. I spent Tuesday evening preparing for that encounter, reviewing my evidence one final time and steeling myself for the conversation that would end Ashley's membership in our family and begin the process of rebuilding everything she had tried to destroy. The woman who had called me mom while planning my murder was about to discover what happened when she underestimated someone who had spent 30 years building an empire and had no intention of letting anyone destroy it, no matter how close to the family they pretended to be. Wednesday arrived with the kind of crisp, November clarity that made the Ohio River look like polished silver beneath the early morning sun. I stood at my kitchen window, watching the last autumn leaves drift from the maple trees that lined my street, knowing that this would be the day everything changed for my family. By evening, Ashley would be in custody, David would know the truth about his wife's crimes, and Thompson's table would begin the process of healing from betrayal that had infected our very foundation. I had spent the night finalizing my strategy, ensuring that every piece of evidence was properly documented, and that all legal requirements were met for Ashley's arrest. Detective Gonzalez would be positioned at the restaurant by noon, ready to take Ashley into custody once she arrived for what she believed would be another routine day of manipulating family dynamics and stealing from our business. Sarah Chen had completed her forensic accounting analysis, providing ironclad documentation of Ashley's embezzlement that totaled nearly $20,000 over 8 months. The most challenging aspect of the day ahead would be protecting David and Emma from the emotional devastation of Ashley's exposure. My son had built his adult life around a woman who had been systematically deceiving him while planning his mother's murder. Emma would lose the mother she adored, facing trauma that could affect her development for years to come. The careful coordination required to minimize their suffering while ensuring Ashley faced appropriate consequences would test every leadership skill I had developed over 3 decades of business management. Dr. Rodriguez had agreed to be present when Ashley was arrested, both to provide medical testimony about the poisoning attempts and to offer immediate counseling support for David and Emma. Her presence would help establish the medical evidence while ensuring that my family received professional guidance for processing the psychological impact of Ashley's crimes. James Mitchell would also be available to handle legal questions and coordinate with law enforcement to protect Thompson's table's interests during the investigation and prosecution. At 8:30 that morning, I called David to request a family meeting at the restaurant at 1 o'clock, explaining that I had important business matters to discuss that would affect all of our futures. I kept my tone carefully neutral, giving no indication of the storm that was about to break over our family. David agreed readily, assuming that I wanted to revisit Ashley's expansion proposals or discuss my recent health concerns. He had no idea that his wife would be arrested before the meeting concluded. Linda Parker arrived at Thompson's table as I was reviewing final preparations with Tom Bradley and our senior staff. Linda had worked for our family for over 15 years, serving as both housekeeper and informal family counselor during difficult periods. Her discretion was absolute, and her emotional intelligence had helped us navigate various crises over the years. Today, her role would be crucial for maintaining normal operations while law enforcement activities occurred in our private dining areas. I gathered the senior staff in our main dining room before regular service began, explaining that we would be hosting law enforcement officials that afternoon for what I described as routine business matters unrelated to restaurant operations. I emphasized that customer service and food quality should continue exactly as always, and that any questions from customers or media should be directed to me personally. The staff accepted my explanation without question, trusting my judgment as they had for years. Tom Bradley pulled me aside after the meeting to express his concern about the tension he had observed in my demeanor over recent weeks. As our kitchen manager, Tom had worked closely with Ashley during her increasing involvement in restaurant operations, and he had noticed subtle changes in her behavior that troubled him. Ashley had been asking unusual questions about our suppliers, requesting access to vendor contracts and payment schedules that exceeded her legitimate business interests. She had also been staying late in the restaurant after closing, claiming to work on expansion planning but actually reviewing financial records for theft opportunities. Most significantly, Tom had observed Ashley's behavior during our family Sunday dinners with the kind of professional attention to detail that made him an excellent kitchen manager. He had noticed that Ashley always tasted my soup before encouraging me to eat, that she positioned herself to observe my consumption, and that she seemed unusually interested in my physical reactions after meals. Tom's observations provided additional witness testimony that would support the prosecution's case, while confirming that Ashley's criminal behavior had been evident to careful observers. The morning service proceeded normally, with our regular Wednesday customers enjoying their favorite dishes while having no idea that their longtime restaurant owner was preparing to expose attempted murder within her own family. I moved through my usual routines of greeting customers, reviewing kitchen operations, and handling administrative tasks, maintaining the composed professionalism that had characterized my management style for decades. The only difference was the small recording device that Detective Gonzalez had provided, which would capture Ashley's statements during our confrontation for use as evidence in her prosecution. At 11:30, Sarah Chen arrived with the completed forensic accounting report that documented every aspect of Ashley's financial crimes. The analysis was devastating in its thoroughness, showing not just the theft of nearly $20,000, but the sophisticated methods Ashley had used to conceal her embezzlement. She had created false vendor accounts, manipulated employee tip reporting, and altered catering deposit records, with the skill of someone whose pharmaceutical sales background had taught her to present complex information convincingly. The report also revealed connections between Ashley's gambling debts and several illegal lending operations that charged interest rates exceeding 300% annually. These predatory lenders typically used intimidation and violence to collect debts, suggesting that Ashley's desperation to access Thompson's table assets might have been driven by threats to her personal safety as well as financial pressure. The implications extended beyond Ashley's individual crimes to potential ongoing risks for our family and business if her criminal associates decided to pursue collection through other means. Detective Gonzalez arrived precisely at noon, accompanied by 2 additional officers who would assist with Ashley's arrest and evidence collection. The detective's calm professionalism was reassuring as we reviewed the final details of our plan and confirmed that all legal requirements had been met for charging Ashley with multiple felonies. The video evidence of Sunday's poisoning attempt was particularly compelling, showing clear intent and premeditation that would support the most serious charges. Dr. Rodriguez joined us shortly afterward, bringing additional medical documentation that established the timeline of my poisoning symptoms and their correlation with digitalis exposure. Her analysis confirmed that Ashley's pharmaceutical knowledge had enabled precise dosing that caused alarming symptoms without immediate fatal consequences, suggesting someone who understood both the effects of cardiac glycosides and the interactions with my prescribed blood thinners. The medical evidence transformed what might have appeared to be family disputes into clear criminal charges supported by scientific analysis. At 12:45, David arrived with Ashley and Emma, expecting a routine family business meeting. Emma immediately ran to me for her customary hug, chattering excitedly about her kindergarten activities, while Ashley and David settled into chairs around our private dining room table. Ashley appeared relaxed and confident, carrying a leather portfolio that undoubtedly contained additional expansion proposals and financial projections designed to pressure me into relinquishing operational control of Thompson's table. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal, given what I knew was about to unfold. Ashley had styled her auburn hair carefully and chosen a professional outfit that projected competence and trustworthiness. She smiled warmly as she greeted me, asking about my health with apparent concern while secretly knowing that her latest poisoning attempt had been recorded in detail. David appeared tired but optimistic, clearly hoping that this meeting would resolve the family tensions that had been building over recent months. Emma settled onto my lap as had become her tradition during family meetings, her innocent presence adding emotional complexity to the confrontation ahead. At 5 years old, she had no understanding of the criminal activity that had been occurring around her, no awareness that her mother had been systematically planning her grandmother's murder while maintaining the facade of a loving family. Protecting Emma from trauma while ensuring justice for Ashley's crimes would require delicate balance throughout the afternoon. I began the meeting by thanking everyone for gathering on short notice and explaining that recent events had revealed information that would significantly affect our family's future. Ashley leaned forward attentively, perhaps expecting me to announce my retirement or decision to accept her expansion proposals. David appeared curious but relaxed, assuming that any serious family business would be handled with the same collaborative approach we had used for years. Instead, I activated the recording device and began presenting the evidence of Ashley's crimes with the systematic thoroughness that my chemistry background had taught me to apply to complex problems. I started with the medical documentation of my poisoning symptoms, explaining how Dr. Rodriguez's testing had revealed digitalis in my soup, and connecting those findings to Ashley's pharmaceutical knowledge and access to my kitchen during Sunday family dinners. Ashley's initial reaction was textbook denial, her pharmaceutical sales training evident in her smooth dismissal of what she characterized as coincidental circumstances that had been misinterpreted due to my recent stress and health concerns. She suggested that my symptoms were consistent with various medical conditions common in women my age, that my suspicions reflected paranoia brought on by grief and overwork, and that accusing family members of serious crimes was evidence of mental deterioration that required immediate medical intervention. David's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he processed the implications of my accusations, his accountant's mind calculating the logical connections between Ashley's behavior and the evidence I was presenting. His initial impulse was to defend his wife against what seemed like impossible allegations, but his growing understanding of the medical and circumstantial evidence began to overwhelm his emotional resistance to accepting Ashley's guilt. The video footage of Sunday's poisoning attempt proved to be the turning point that shattered Ashley's defensive strategy. The high-definition recording showed her clearly adding something to my soup bowl while checking to ensure she wasn't being observed, timing her actions with the precision of someone who had performed the same task multiple times previously. Her confident assertions about my paranoia and medical deterioration became impossible to maintain when confronted with visual evidence of deliberate criminal activity. Ashley's demeanor changed dramatically as she realized that her carefully constructed deception had been discovered and documented with legal precision. The smooth professional competence that had characterized her pharmaceutical sales career gave way to desperate attempts to minimize her actions and shift blame to circumstances beyond her control. She claimed that financial pressure from gambling debts had driven her to desperate measures, that her poisoning attempts were never intended to cause serious harm, and that her theft from Thompson's table was temporary borrowing that she had planned to repay once her expansion proposals were implemented. David's emotional response intensified as the full scope of Ashley's betrayal became clear. His wife had not only attempted to murder his mother, but had been systematically stealing from the family business while manipulating him into supporting her schemes for gaining control of Thompson's table. The woman he had trusted with his love, his future, and his daughter's welfare had been living a double life that endangered everyone who cared about her. Most devastating for David was the realization that Ashley's affection for him and Emma might have been calculated manipulation designed to achieve her financial goals. Her pharmaceutical sales background had taught her to research her targets thoroughly and present information in ways that achieved desired outcomes. David began questioning whether any aspect of their relationship had been genuine, or whether he had simply been a useful pathway to accessing Thompson's table's assets. Emma sensed the rising tension in the room and began asking innocent questions about why everyone seemed upset, her 5-year-old perspective unable to comprehend the adult complexities unfolding around her. I held her close while continuing to present evidence, trying to provide comfort and stability while her world began to collapse. Emma's presence reminded everyone in the room that Ashley's crimes would have consequences extending far beyond legal punishment, affecting a child who had done nothing to deserve the trauma of losing her mother to criminal conviction. Sarah Chen's forensic accounting analysis provided additional evidence that demolished Ashley's remaining credibility. The detailed documentation of her embezzlement showed sophisticated planning that had occurred over many months, contradicting her claims about temporary financial borrowing. The connections to illegal gambling operations and prescription fraud revealed criminal activity that extended far beyond her attempts to access Thompson's table assets. When Detective Gonzalez entered the dining room to place Ashley under arrest, the confrontation reached its inevitable conclusion. Ashley's final desperate attempt to maintain her innocence collapsed when faced with law enforcement officers who had reviewed comprehensive evidence of her crimes. The handcuffs that clicked around her wrist represented not just the end of her freedom, but the conclusion of months of systematic deception that had nearly destroyed my family. David's emotional breakdown began as soon as Ashley was led away, the full weight of her betrayal overwhelming his ability to maintain composure. "Doctor, my death or permanent incapacitation would trigger several insurance policies that Robert had maintained to protect the business, providing Ashley with immediate access to substantial cash settlements. More importantly, my absence would remove the primary obstacle to her plans for rapid restaurant expansion. Ashley had already researched franchise opportunities, identified potential investors, and developed business plans for opening Thompson's Table locations in Columbus, Cincinnati, and other Ohio cities. What Ashley failed to understand was that Thompson's Table's success was built on precisely the kind of personal attention and community connection that corporate expansion would destroy. Our regular customers didn't come just for the food, though our menu was exceptional. They came for the sense of belonging that we had cultivated over 3 generations. The feeling that Thompson's Table was their place where special occasions were celebrated, business deals were negotiated, and family traditions were maintained. Our catering business thrived because clients trusted us to handle their most important events with the same attention to detail we brought to every dinner service. Our staff loyalty was legendary in an industry known for high turnover because we treated employees as extended family members rather than replaceable workers. Our reputation for quality and integrity had been built over decades through countless small decisions that prioritized long-term relationships over short-term profits. Ashley's franchise vision would have required standardizing recipes to ensure consistency across multiple locations, eliminating the seasonal variations and local ingredients that made our menu distinctive. It would have demanded corporate pricing structures that would price out many of our longtime customers while attracting diners who valued convenience over quality. Most critically, it would have destroyed the personal relationships with suppliers, staff, and customers that formed the foundation of everything we had built. As I sat in my office that Sunday evening, reviewing the video evidence of Ashley's latest poisoning attempt, I realized that her betrayal extended far beyond attempted murder. She was planning to destroy the legacy that Harold had created, that Robert had expanded, and that I had spent 30 years perfecting. The woman I had welcomed as a daughter was prepared to eliminate me not just physically, but professionally, erasing everything I had contributed to Thompson's Table, while claiming credit for the expansion plans that would ultimately destroy its soul. The weight of this realization settled over me like a physical presence, heavy and cold and utterly clarifying. Ashley had made a fundamental miscalculation in assuming that I was simply an aging restaurant owner who could be manipulated through false medical emergencies and professional intimidation. She had failed to recognize that my chemistry background, combined with 3 decades of business experience, had created someone far more formidable than she had anticipated. Monday morning brought the first phase of my response strategy. I arrived at Thompson's Table before dawn, as had been my habit for years, to review weekend receipts and prepare for the weekly staff meeting. But this Monday was different. This Monday, I was no longer a victim of Ashley's schemes, but the architect of her downfall. I began by securing the video evidence of Sunday's poisoning attempt, transferring the files to multiple locations, and creating encrypted backups that would be accessible to law enforcement when the time came. The restaurant's 3-generation legacy of integrity and quality provided a foundation strong enough to withstand the scandal of criminal activity within our family. As I tucked Emma into the guest bedroom that night, listening to her innocent questions about when her mommy would come home, I realized that Ashley's crimes had created an opportunity, as well as a crisis. The business expansion that Ashley had pursued through criminal means could now be achieved through legitimate methods that honored Thompson's Table's values, while providing growth opportunities for our dedicated staff. More importantly, Ashley's removal from our family had eliminated a source of manipulation and financial pressure that had been undermining our relationships and business decisions for months. David would need time to heal from the betrayal and rebuild his confidence in his own judgment, but he possessed the integrity and work ethic necessary to become a true partner in Thompson's Table's future, rather than a vulnerable target for criminal exploitation. The woman who had tried to poison me to steal my family's legacy had instead strengthened my determination to protect everything we had built while expanding our impact in ways that honored 3 generations of Thompson family values. Ashley's crimes were her choice and her responsibility, but Thompson's Table's response would demonstrate the resilience and integrity that defined our true character. 6 months after Ashley's arrest, I stood in the newly renovated kitchen of Thompson's Table's 2nd location in downtown Cincinnati, watching my expanded team prepare for opening night. The gleaming stainless steel surfaces reflected the warm lighting that had become our signature aesthetic, while the open kitchen design allowed diners to witness the careful preparation that went into every dish. Emma helped arrange the fresh flowers that would grace each table, her small hands working with the same attention to detail that had characterized Thompson family traditions for 3 generations. The transformation of my family and business over the past year had been both painful and remarkable. Ashley's conviction on multiple felony charges had resulted in a 15-year prison sentence that reflected the severity of her crimes and the premeditation evident in her systematic poisoning attempts. The judge had been particularly harsh in sentencing, noting that Ashley's pharmaceutical background had enabled her to calculate dosages that would cause maximum suffering while avoiding immediate detection. David had emerged from the trauma of Ashley's betrayal stronger and more focused than I had ever seen him. The counseling that Dr. Rodriguez had arranged immediately after Ashley's arrest had helped him process the psychological manipulation he had endured while rebuilding his confidence in his own judgment. More importantly, David had thrown himself into Thompson's Table operations with a passion that reminded me of his father's dedication to excellence and community service. The forensic accounting investigation that followed Ashley's arrest had revealed the full scope of her criminal enterprise, including connections to illegal gambling operations and prescription drug trafficking that extended across 3 states. Federal prosecutors had used Ashley's cooperation to dismantle several criminal networks, though her assistance had not significantly reduced her sentence given the severity of her attempted murder charges. Most gratifying had been the discovery that Ashley's theft from Thompson's Table totaled less than we had initially calculated. Her sophisticated embezzlement methods had created the appearance of larger losses, but careful forensic analysis revealed that most of our missing funds could be recovered through asset seizure and restitution orders. The insurance settlements related to her crimes had provided additional capital that funded our legitimate expansion plans. Emma's resilience throughout the crisis had been extraordinary, though not without challenges that required ongoing professional support. Dr. Rodriguez had connected us with child psychologists who specialized in helping young children process parental criminality and abandonment. Emma's therapy sessions had included art projects and play activities that allowed her to express complex emotions while building coping mechanisms for the reality that her mother was gone permanently. The community support that Thompson's Table received during the crisis had reinforced my belief in the values that built our success over 3 generations. Regular customers had rallied around our family, expressing outrage at Ashley's crimes, while reaffirming their loyalty to the restaurant that had been part of their own family traditions for decades. Local business leaders had offered assistance ranging from legal advice to financial support, though our strong position meant that such help wasn't necessary. Media coverage of Ashley's arrest and trial had been extensive but generally favorable to Thompson's Table, emphasizing that her crimes were individual choices that reflected no deficiencies in our business operations or family values. Several prominent food writers had published articles about family restaurants surviving criminal scandals, using our situation as an example of how authentic businesses with strong community connections could weather even the most serious crises. The expansion into Cincinnati had been planned for years but accelerated after Ashley's arrest eliminated the obstacles she had created through her criminal schemes. Unlike Ashley's franchise vision that would have standardized our operations and destroyed our personal touch, our expansion strategy focused on replicating the community connection and quality standards that made Thompson's Table distinctive. Each new location would maintain local suppliers, hire regional staff, and adapt our menu to reflect local tastes while preserving the core recipes and service philosophy that defined our brand. Our Cincinnati location occupied a historic building that had housed restaurants for over a century, with exposed brick walls and original hardwood floors that created warmth and character impossible to achieve in modern chain establishments. The renovation had preserved architectural details while updating kitchen equipment and dining areas to meet contemporary standards for accessibility and efficiency. Local artists had contributed murals that celebrated Cincinnati's riverfront heritage while connecting to Thompson's Table's Ohio River origins. David had taken primary responsibility for the Cincinnati expansion, demonstrating project management skills and attention to detail that exceeded my most optimistic expectations. His accounting background had proven invaluable for managing construction budgets and analyzing market conditions, while his personal investment in proving himself after Ashley's betrayal had driven him to exceed every milestone we had established for the new location. The staff we had recruited for Cincinnati reflected the same values that made our Riverside location successful, emphasizing experienced professionals who understood that exceptional restaurant service required genuine care for customer satisfaction rather than scripted interactions. Tom Bradley had trained our Cincinnati kitchen manager personally, ensuring that food quality and preparation methods met Thompson's Table standards while allowing for local menu variations that would appeal to Cincinnati diners. Emma had embraced her role as the youngest member of Thompson's Table's expanding empire, taking particular pride in helping me select decorative elements and taste test new menu items developed specifically for our Cincinnati location. Her involvement in business decisions had become therapeutic as well as practical, giving her a sense of ownership and continuity that helped compensate for the disruption Ashley's crimes had created in her young life. The grand opening celebration for our Cincinnati location had been planned as a family affair that would introduce Thompson's Table to a new community while celebrating our resilience and growth. Local dignitaries would attend, along with food critics from regional publications and loyal customers who had driven from Riverside to support our expansion. The evening would showcase everything that made Thompson's Table special, while demonstrating that criminal attacks on our family had only strengthened our commitment to excellence. As I reviewed final preparations for the opening night service, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that November evening, when I first suspected that Ashley was poisoning my soup. The woman who had been slowly killing me while planning to steal my family's legacy had inadvertently catalyzed a transformation that elevated Thompson's Table to heights I had never imagined possible. Ashley's fundamental error had been assuming that victimizing an older woman would be easier than targeting someone younger and more obviously formidable. Her pharmaceutical sales background had taught her to research her targets and identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited for personal gain. But she had completely misjudged both my capabilities and my determination to protect everything I valued. The chemistry knowledge that I had developed decades earlier but never used professionally had proven crucial for recognizing her poisoning methods and gathering evidence for her prosecution. More importantly, Ashley had underestimated the community connections and business relationships that I had cultivated over 30 years of restaurant ownership. Her criminal schemes had required isolation and secrecy to succeed, but Thompson's Table's success was built on exactly the opposite foundation: transparency, community engagement, and collaborative relationships with suppliers, staff, and customers, who became extended family members over time. The legal proceedings that followed Ashley's arrest had vindicated my decision to respond strategically rather than emotionally to her crimes. James Mitchell's guidance had ensured that all evidence was properly documented and that Thompson's Table's interests were protected throughout the investigation and prosecution. Detective Gonzalez's professionalism had resulted in charges that reflected the full severity of Ashley's criminal enterprise, while building a prosecution case that withstood every legal challenge Ashley's defense attorneys attempted. Most satisfying had been Ashley's complete downfall in federal court, where her attempts to minimize her crimes and claim victimization by circumstances beyond her control had been demolished by the video evidence of her poisoning my soup. The judge's comments during sentencing had emphasized that Ashley's pharmaceutical knowledge and systematic approach to attempted murder demonstrated exactly the kind of premeditation that warranted maximum penalties under federal guidelines. Dr. Rodriguez had testified as an expert witness about the medical evidence that proved Ashley's criminal intent, explaining how the precise digitalis dosages found in my soup samples required both pharmaceutical knowledge and calculated planning to achieve specific symptom patterns. Her testimony had been crucial for establishing that Ashley's actions constituted attempted murder rather than reckless endangerment, significantly increasing the potential prison sentence Ashley would face. The financial recovery that followed Ashley's conviction had exceeded our most optimistic projections, with asset seizures and restitution orders ultimately recovering more money than Ashley had stolen from Thompson's Table. Federal prosecutors had been particularly aggressive about seizing Ashley's gambling winnings and the proceeds from her prescription drug sales, redirecting those funds to compensate her victims while ensuring that she derived no financial benefit from her criminal activities. Our insurance companies had initially resisted claims related to Ashley's embezzlement, arguing that family member theft might not be covered under our commercial policies. However, James Mitchell's expertise in insurance law had successfully argued that Ashley's systematic criminal enterprise constituted external criminal activity rather than internal family disputes, ultimately resulting in substantial settlements that funded both our Cincinnati expansion and enhanced security measures for all Thompson's Table locations. The enhanced security systems we had implemented across our operations included background checks for all employees with access to financial systems, multiple authorization requirements for vendor payments and cash handling, and surveillance equipment that would detect and record any suspicious activities. These measures provided protection against future criminal schemes while reassuring our staff and customers that Thompson's Table took security seriously. David's personal transformation throughout this crisis had been the most rewarding aspect of an otherwise devastating experience. The young man who had been manipulated by Ashley's criminal schemes had emerged as a confident business leader whose integrity and work ethic exceeded even his father's high standards. His management of our Cincinnati expansion had demonstrated decision-making capabilities and attention to detail that positioned him to eventually assume leadership of Thompson's Table's growing empire. Emma's adjustment to life without Ashley had required ongoing professional support, but her resilience and adaptability had proven remarkable for a child her age. The therapy sessions had helped her understand that her mother's absence wasn't her fault, and that the adults in her life remained committed to providing love and stability despite the crisis. Emma's continued involvement in Thompson's Table operations had given her a sense of purpose and belonging that helped compensate for the trauma of losing her mother to criminal conviction. The opening night service for our Cincinnati location proceeded flawlessly, with every dish meeting Thompson's Table standards, while showcasing local ingredients and flavors that would appeal to our new community. David moved through the dining room with confidence and grace, greeting customers and addressing their questions with the kind of personal attention that distinguished family restaurants from corporate chains. Emma had insisted on wearing her best dress for the grand opening, taking her role as Thompson's Table's youngest representative seriously, while charming customers with her enthusiasm and knowledge about our family recipes. Her presence reminded everyone that Thompson's Table represented multi-generational values that transcended any individual crisis or criminal attack. The local food critics who attended our opening night had been impressed not just by our food quality and service standards, but by the story of resilience and growth that our expansion represented. Several had requested interviews about how family restaurants could survive criminal scandals while maintaining their authentic character and community connections. As the evening concluded and our Cincinnati team completed their first successful service, I gathered David and Emma in our private office to reflect on how far we had traveled since Ashley's crimes had threatened to destroy everything we valued. The expansion that Ashley had pursued through criminal means had been achieved through legitimate business practices that honored our family values, while creating opportunities for dedicated employees and enhanced service for loyal customers. Thompson's Table now employed over 70 people across 2 locations, with plans for additional expansion that would create hundreds of jobs while spreading our commitment to quality and community service throughout Ohio and beyond. The business that Ashley had tried to steal through attempted murder had grown stronger and more valuable as a direct result of her criminal schemes being exposed and defeated. Most importantly, our family had survived the worst betrayal imaginable, while emerging more united and focused than ever before. David had proven himself capable of leadership that would honor his father's legacy while building something even greater for future generations. Emma had demonstrated resilience that suggested she would grow into a young woman capable of handling whatever challenges life might present. The financial independence that Thompson's Table's success provided had given me options for the future that extended far beyond restaurant operations. I had been approached about writing a cookbook that would share our family recipes while telling the story of surviving criminal betrayal through strategic response and community support. Food Network had expressed interest in featuring Thompson's Table in a documentary about family restaurants that had overcome extraordinary challenges. Several business schools had requested case studies about how family businesses could implement security measures and crisis management strategies that would protect against criminal schemes while maintaining the personal relationships that created their competitive advantages. My experience with Ashley's crimes had provided insights that could help other business owners recognize and respond to similar threats. The speaking engagements that had begun arriving since news of Ashley's conviction became public had opened possibilities for consulting work with family businesses facing various forms of internal criminal activity. My combination of business experience, analytical background, and successful prosecution of a family member who had committed serious crimes had created expertise that was apparently rare and valuable in the business community. As David, Emma, and I shared a quiet dinner in our Cincinnati location after the successful grand opening, I realized that Ashley's attempt to destroy my life had actually created opportunities for impact and influence that I had never imagined possible. The woman who had tried to poison me to steal my family's restaurant empire had instead elevated Thompson's Table to regional prominence while demonstrating that criminal attacks on authentic businesses would ultimately strengthen rather than weaken their foundations. Emma fell asleep in my arms as we drove back to Riverside that night, exhausted from the excitement of helping with our grand opening, but proud of her contribution to Thompson's Table's continued success. David drove carefully through the Ohio countryside, both of us reflecting on how completely our family dynamic had changed since Ashley's removal from our lives. The woman who had called me mom while systematically planning my murder was now serving 15 years in federal prison, her pharmaceutical sales career destroyed, and her gambling debts transferred to asset recovery specialists who would ensure that her victims received maximum restitution. The daughter-in-law who had manipulated family relationships while stealing from our business had been replaced by authentic connections between family members who genuinely cared about each other's well-being and Thompson's Table's continued success. The legacy that Ashley had tried to steal through criminal means would now pass to Emma when she reached adulthood, though she would inherit something far greater than Ashley had ever envisioned. Thompson's Table's expansion would continue under David's leadership, creating opportunities for Emma to contribute her own ideas and energy, while building on 4 generations of family commitment to excellence and community service. The bitter herbs that Ashley had hidden in my soup had indeed created something bitter in her life, though not in the way she had intended. Her attempt to poison me had resulted in her own destruction while catalyzing growth and success that honored everything Thompson's Table represented. The woman who had underestimated a restaurant owner's intelligence and determination had discovered that attempted murder was a remarkably poor strategy for gaining control of assets owned by someone capable of fighting back with precision that would make a chemist proud. As we arrived home that night and I tucked Emma into bed, listening to her excited chatter about our successful Cincinnati opening, I realized that Ashley's crimes had taught me something important about the nature of true strength and resilience. The woman who had tried to eliminate me through pharmaceutical precision had actually eliminated herself, while proving that authentic success built on genuine values would always triumph over criminal schemes based on deception and manipulation. Thompson's Table's future stretched ahead with possibilities that Ashley's narrow vision of franchise expansion could never have achieved. Our commitment to quality, community connection, and family values had created a foundation strong enough to support growth that would honor our 3-generation legacy, while building something even greater for Emma's generation and beyond. The soup that Ashley had poisoned with digitalis would continue to be served at Thompson's Table, though now with enhanced security measures and the knowledge that our family had survived the worst betrayal imaginable while emerging stronger and more united than ever before. The bitter taste that Ashley had tried to hide in my favorite recipe had been replaced by the sweet satisfaction of justice served and dreams achieved through legitimate means that honored everything our family had built over decades of dedicated service. 2 years had passed since Ashley was led away in handcuffs from Thompson's Table, and the woman sitting across from me in the federal courthouse visitor's room bore little resemblance to the confident pharmaceutical sales representative who had once charmed her way into my family. Ashley's auburn hair had grown gray at the roots, her designer clothes replaced by the standard orange jumpsuit that marked her as federal inmate number 478290019. The green eyes that had once sparkled with calculated warmth now held the hollow desperation of someone who had gambled everything on a scheme that spectacularly backfired. I had driven the 3 hours to the Federal Correctional Facility in Lexington, Kentucky, not out of sympathy or forgiveness, but because Ashley had repeatedly requested this meeting through her attorney. Her letters, filtered through legal channels, had become increasingly frantic over the past months, as the reality of her 15-year sentence settled into the mundane horror of daily prison life. The woman who had attempted to eliminate me through pharmaceutical precision was now discovering that attempted murder carried consequences that extended far beyond her original calculations. Ashley's appearance when she entered the visiting room shocked me, despite my mental preparation for the changes that prison life would have wrought. The woman who had maintained a flawless appearance throughout 7 years of marriage to my son now looked older than her 31 years, her face bearing the stress lines that came from constant vigilance in an environment where weakness was exploited without mercy. The confidence that had enabled her to manipulate family dynamics while committing multiple felonies had been replaced by the nervous energy of someone who lived in perpetual fear. Her first words confirmed what I had suspected about her motives for requesting this meeting. Ashley's voice carried none of the smooth professionalism that had characterized her pharmaceutical sales presentations or the calculated warmth she had displayed during family gatherings. Instead, her tone held the desperate edge of someone whose carefully constructed world had collapsed entirely, leaving her grasping for any connection to the life she had destroyed through her own criminal choices. Ashley began with what appeared to be a rehearsed apology, acknowledging that her attempts to poison me had been wrong, and expressing regret for the pain she had caused our family. Her words carried the hollow ring of someone who had been coached by prison counselors or legal advisors, focusing on taking responsibility for her actions while carefully avoiding admissions that might complicate her ongoing legal situation. The pharmaceutical sales training that had once enabled her to present complex information convincingly now served only to make her contrition seem calculated rather than genuine. What Ashley really wanted became clear as her rehearsed statements gave way to increasingly desperate pleas for assistance with her appeals process. She had convinced herself that her conviction was somehow unjust, that the video evidence of her poisoning my soup had been obtained illegally, that her sentence was disproportionate to crimes that she characterized as momentary lapses in judgment rather than systematic criminal enterprise. The woman who had spent months planning my elimination with pharmaceutical precision was now claiming that her actions had been impulsive responses to gambling addiction rather than calculated attempts at murder. The delusion underlying Ashley's worldview became apparent as she outlined her theories about how her conviction could be overturned and her sentence reduced to allow for earlier release. She had spent her prison time researching legal precedents and developing arguments that revealed her fundamental inability to accept responsibility for choices that had destroyed multiple lives. The analytical skills that had enabled her to calculate digitalis dosages were now being applied to fantasy scenarios where she could somehow escape the consequences of attempting to murder her mother-in-law. Most disturbing was Ashley's apparent belief that I might actually assist with her efforts to overturn her conviction. She seemed to think that my presence in the visiting room indicated forgiveness, or at least willingness to consider that her punishment was excessive, given what she characterized as her underlying mental health issues. The woman who had systematically planned my death while stealing from my business was now suggesting that our shared family history should motivate me to help reduce her prison sentence. I listened to Ashley's desperate presentation with the same analytical detachment that had enabled me to uncover her criminal schemes 24 months earlier. Her pharmaceutical sales background was evident in the way she organized her arguments, presenting information in logical sequences designed to achieve specific outcomes. However, the desperation that had driven her to attempt murder was now channeled into equally futile efforts to convince me that she deserved assistance rather than the justice that had already been served. When Ashley finally exhausted her rehearsed appeals and desperate rationalizations, I responded with the calm precision that had characterized my approach to handling her crimes from the moment I first suspected her poisoning attempts. I explained that I had come to this meeting not to consider assisting with her legal appeals, but to ensure that she understood completely how her actions had affected everyone she claimed to love. The updates I provided about our family's life since her incarceration were designed to illustrate the natural consequences of her criminal choices. David had flourished since her removal from his life, demonstrating leadership capabilities and personal integrity that her manipulation had previously suppressed. His involvement in Thompson's table operations had deepened beyond my most optimistic expectations, with innovations and improvements that honored our family traditions while building sustainable growth for future generations. Emma's development over the past 2 years had been remarkable, despite the trauma of losing her mother to criminal conviction. The therapy sessions that Dr. Rodriguez had arranged immediately after Ashley's arrest had helped Emma process her emotions while building resilience that would serve her throughout life. At 7 years old, Emma had become an integral part of Thompson's Table operations, greeting customers with genuine warmth and helping with tasks that taught her the value of hard work and community service. Most importantly, Emma's memories of Ashley were fading naturally as she built relationships with adults who genuinely cared about her well-being, rather than viewing her as a tool for achieving criminal objectives. The child psychology specialists had assured us that Emma's age at the time of Ashley's removal would minimize long-term psychological damage, particularly given the stable family environment that surrounded her after the crisis passed. Thompson's Table's expansion had accelerated dramatically following Ashley's conviction, with our Cincinnati location exceeding every performance metric we had established for the first year of operations. The community response to our growth had been overwhelmingly positive, with customers appreciating the personal attention and quality standards that distinguished family restaurants from corporate chains. Food critics had featured our expansion as a model for how authentic businesses could scale successfully while maintaining their distinctive character. The financial recovery that followed the resolution of Ashley's criminal cases had exceeded our most optimistic projections, with insurance settlements and asset seizures ultimately providing more capital than Ashley had stolen through her embezzlement schemes. The enhanced security measures we had implemented across all locations had prevented similar schemes, while reassuring staff and customers that Thompson's Table took protection seriously. Ashley's face throughout my update reflected the growing realization that her elimination from our family had created opportunities for growth and success that her presence had actively hindered. The woman who had attempted to steal control of Thompson's Table through murder and fraud was discovering that her removal had unleashed potential that her manipulation had suppressed for years. The most devastating information I shared concerned the legal and financial consequences that would follow Ashley throughout the remainder of her life. The federal conviction for attempted murder would prevent her from obtaining employment in healthcare, pharmaceuticals, or any field requiring professional licensing. The embezzlement charges had created civil liability that would attach to any asset she might acquire after her eventual release from prison. Most significantly, the family court proceedings that had terminated Ashley's parental rights were final and irreversible, ensuring that Emma would never again be subjected to the manipulation and criminal influence that had characterized Ashley's approach to relationships. David had been granted sole custody with court orders that prevented Ashley from any contact with Emma upon her release from prison. The restraining orders that protected both David and Emma from future contact with Ashley extended beyond the end of her prison sentence, creating legal barriers that would prevent her from re-entering their lives even decades in the future. These protections had been designed to ensure that Ashley's release from prison wouldn't create new opportunities for manipulation or criminal activity targeting our family members. Ashley's reaction to this information revealed the narcissistic personality disorder that had enabled her criminal schemes while preventing her from understanding their inevitable consequences. Rather than accepting responsibility for choices that had destroyed her relationships with the people she claimed to love, Ashley focused on what she perceived as unfair punishments that exceeded the severity of her crimes. The victim mentality that Ashley had developed during her incarceration was consistent with psychological profiles of criminals who committed serious crimes against family members. Her inability to empathize with the fear and trauma she had caused reflected the same emotional deficits that had enabled her to plan my murder while maintaining the facade of a caring daughter-in-law. As our meeting approached its conclusion, Ashley made one final desperate attempt to elicit some form of assistance or sympathy for her situation. She claimed that her gambling addiction had been a mental health condition that diminished her responsibility for subsequent criminal acts, that her pharmaceutical knowledge had been used impulsively rather than with calculated intent, and that her 15-year sentence was disproportionate to crimes that she characterized as family disputes rather than serious federal offenses. The response I provided was designed to ensure that Ashley understood exactly why her request for assistance would never be considered. I explained that her systematic approach to attempted murder, documented through months of careful planning and precise pharmaceutical calculations, had demonstrated exactly the kind of premeditation that warranted maximum legal penalties. Her theft from Thompson's Table, combined with prescription fraud and connections to illegal gambling operations, had created a criminal enterprise that extended far beyond family relationship issues, Most importantly, I emphasized that Ashley's conviction and imprisonment had protected not just our family, but countless other potential victims who might have been targeted by her criminal schemes if they had continued unchecked. Her pharmaceutical knowledge and manipulative skills represented genuine danger to any community where she had access to vulnerable targets and opportunities for financial exploitation. The woman who had called me mom while planning my elimination had forfeited any claim to family loyalty or assistance through choices that revealed her fundamental character. The daughter-in-law, who had bounced Emma on her lap while calculating digitalis dosages, had demonstrated that her affection had always been calculated manipulation designed to achieve criminal objectives. As I prepared to leave the federal correctional facility, Ashley made one final appeal that revealed the depth of her self-delusion about the nature of her crimes and their consequences. She suggested that my unwillingness to assist with her legal appeals demonstrated vindictiveness rather than justice, that my success in expanding Thompson's table proved that her crimes hadn't really caused significant damage, and that our family's healing was evidence that forgiveness should lead to practical assistance with reducing her prison sentence. The response I provided was brief and final. Ashley's attempt to poison me had been the culmination of months of systematic criminal activity that endangered my life while threatening everything my family had built over 3 generations. Her conviction and imprisonment represented justice, served through legal processes that she had attempted to circumvent through manipulation and violence. The bitter consequences that Ashley was experiencing in federal prison were the natural result of choices she had made with full knowledge of their potential outcomes. The pharmaceutical sales representative who had calculated digitalis dosages to achieve specific symptom patterns was certainly capable of understanding that attempted murder carried severe legal penalties, including lengthy prison sentences. Most importantly, the success that Thompson's table had achieved since Ashley's removal from our family demonstrated the positive outcomes that resulted when criminal manipulation was replaced by authentic relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. The expansion and growth that Ashley had pursued through attempted murder had been achieved through legitimate business practices that honored our commitment to quality and community service. As I walked through the prison parking lot toward my car, I reflected on how completely Ashley's criminal schemes had backfired, despite her pharmaceutical knowledge and manipulative skills. The woman who had attempted to eliminate me through calculated poisoning was now serving 15 years in federal prison while I continued building the business empire she had tried to steal. The daughter-in-law who had planned my death to gain control of Thompson's table was now permanently separated from the family she had betrayed, while Emma grew up surrounded by adults who genuinely cared about her well-being, rather than viewing her as a tool for achieving criminal objectives. The pharmaceutical sales representative who had used her professional knowledge for attempted murder would never again have access to controlled substances or vulnerable targets. Most satisfying was the knowledge that Ashley's gambling addiction, which had motivated her escalating criminal activity, had been replaced by the grinding reality of prison life where every day was the same, and every decision was controlled by authorities who viewed her as a dangerous felon rather than a persuasive professional. The woman who had risked everything on schemes that required constant manipulation was now living in an environment where such skills were worthless. The drive back to Riverside gave me time to process the emotional impact of seeing Ashley after 2 years of imprisonment, and to appreciate how completely our family had healed from the trauma of her criminal attacks. David's confidence and leadership abilities had flourished without the constant manipulation that had characterized his marriage to a woman whose primary interest was accessing Thompson's table assets through any means necessary. Emma's laughter and enthusiasm for helping with restaurant operations demonstrated resilience that honored the Thompson family tradition of overcoming adversity through hard work and community connection. Her involvement in our business activities provided her with a sense of purpose and belonging that would serve her throughout life, while ensuring that Thompson's table traditions continued into the 4th generation. The expansion plans that were already under development for our 3rd location in Columbus represented growth that honored our family values while creating opportunities for dedicated employees and enhanced service for loyal customers. The business that Ashley had attempted to steal through murder and fraud had grown stronger and more valuable as a direct result of her criminal schemes being exposed and defeated through strategic response rather than emotional reaction. Thompson's Table's reputation throughout Ohio had been enhanced rather than damaged by our successful handling of criminal attacks within our own family. The story of surviving attempted murder while maintaining business operations and community connections had attracted media attention that elevated our profile among customers who valued authentic family businesses over corporate chains. As I arrived home that evening and began preparing dinner in the kitchen where Ashley had repeatedly poisoned my soup, I realized that her criminal schemes had taught me important lessons about the nature of authentic success and the futility of pursuing goals through manipulation and violence. The woman who had tried to eliminate me through pharmaceutical precision had instead eliminated herself, while proving that genuine achievements built on legitimate methods would always triumph over criminal enterprises based on deception and betrayal. The tomato basil soup that I served Emma and David that night was prepared with the same care and attention to detail that had characterized Thompson's Table recipes for 3 generations, though now with the knowledge that our family had survived the worst betrayal imaginable while emerging stronger and more united than ever before. The bitter herbs that Ashley had hidden in my favorite recipe had been replaced by the sweet satisfaction of justice served and dreams achieved through hard work rather than criminal shortcuts. The woman who had put poison in my soup had indeed created something bitter in her own life, spending her days in a federal prison cell while I continued building the empire she had tried to steal. Ashley's attempt to destroy me had instead catalyzed growth and success that exceeded anything I had imagined possible before her criminal schemes forced me to discover capabilities I had never needed to use. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.